Yeah, thank you. And welcome to all of you. As Mr. Wallison already said, I will be introducing myself today. That's fine with me too. And I'll make it quite short. As already said, my name is Nora Pauline Berg. And actually, I think this is already all there is to know, except that I studied both in Gießen and Würzburg. And I'm working now in a museum, creating exhibitions on my own. And today's topic is means and goals of German war exhibitions during the First World War. And without any further ado, I will just jump right into the topic by setting the scene for you. World War I, also called the Great War in English and French, and it is defined as a total war. It is the war in which all former known ways of battle, such as mobile warfare, weren't applicable anymore. Technological advances were made and brought new weaponry into the warfare. Both soldiers and civilians of all nations involved suffered a great deal during the 4 years of the war between 1914 and 1918, and of course also in the aftermath of the war. The suffering was really all-embracing, yet the experience of the war was completely different for the men in the trenches and the people at home, the so-called home front. And this is where the authorities come into the picture for us. They feared that there would be too great a chasm between the experience of these two groups. And in order to mobilize and also moralize soldiers and civilians alike, all fighting countries, not only the German Empire, included the machinery of propaganda into their warfare. Yet, especially in the first year of the war, the public enthusiasm and advocacy for the war was immense. There was almost no need to control the public mindset as the excitement came along naturally. But then reality slowly kicked in, the casualty lists got longer and longer, and the warfare itself transformed into a static one. This is when propaganda was desperately needed to keep the morale high, or at least that is what the authorities thought. And of course, you all know these posters with various propagandistic motives, always blaming the others and calling to enlist, to donate, to help, and so on. Another medium used for propaganda, though less known but not less effective, were so-called war exhibitions, today's topic. These exhibitions got introduced 2 years into the war. They were not a phenomenon of bringing military history into the museum, but on the contrary, bringing an idealized version of the then present war into the museum. And we will have a look at how they managed to do so in just a few minutes. Before I go into the analyzation, I want to shortly explain with which analytical concept I am working in the following and what I mean by using words like signs and symbols. And of course, I shortly want to say something about the object of investigation. In contrast to analyses of museums and exhibitions of today, where you just walk in and experience, the possibilities of analyzing historical exhibitions are limited, as you can imagine. One needs to experience the exhibition through the historical sources which survived over the time. Meaning, We need to base our analysis on what we see in the picture and connecting it with, in this case, official exhibitions, catalogs, newspaper articles, and of course, bringing it into the context of these times. Luckily, in the case of today's topic, enough photographies are accessible, as you can see, in order to analyze parts of the exhibitions. But sadly, it is kind of closely to impossible to analyze one German war exhibition on its entirety. This is why we will have a look at case examples today. But what I want to make clear, because this also took a long time for me to distinguish, is that the object of investigation are not the photographies as historical items themselves, such as, for example, the properties of the paper or inscriptions on the back or any other little tiny notes we can get from the objects themselves, but it is rather about the depicted exhibitions which bear various signs and symbols. And speaking of signs and symbols, those of you who may come from the field of art history or even linguistics might know what I'm aiming at, because there are different concepts of signs in language. They got developed in this field. And don't worry, I won't get into those because I'm not even from that field, but yet they are quite crucial for everything happening afterwards. So if I would need to break all these concepts there are down to one sentence, it would be the following. The world consists of endless signs through which communication can happen, and we really constantly decipher those signs, may it be consciously or unconsciously, most of the times actually, in order to read the world surrounding us. I know this was rather a long sentence, and of course I can't leave it with only the sentence. And by now you might ask yourselves, why is she talking about linguistics? Fair question. My analysis or interpretation of the war exhibitions is loosely based on methods created for the interpretation of art. These methods in turn are based on the already mentioned linguistic methods. And I'll give you an example for you to understand what I'm talking about on this level. So, plain and simple, when I say, or if you read the word letter, there might be two pictures in your mind right now, either one or the other, or even both. A letter can be a written message on paper, which gets sent to somebody. And the other one is one single written symbol, which represents one of the sounds in a language. And you see, there is one word with two meanings. And this concept can be applied when analyzing the war exhibitions. There is one object, which can be not one, but two or even more meanings and messages. And in the context of analyzing exhibitions on the basis of semiotics, this linguistic concept, I will cite the following explanation by Ms. Mieke Baal. And she writes on the communication concept in exhibitions the following. In exhibitions, a first person, the exposer, tells a second person, the visitor, about a third person, the object on display, who does not participate in the conversation. But unlike many other constitutive speech acts, the object, although mute, is present. End of quotation. She furthermore states that the thing on display comes to stand for something else, that the thing recedes into invisibility and its sign status takes precedence to make the statement. So it is important to note that there is a discrepancy between the object itself and the sign it possibly carries. Especially when or because objects can carry several signs and meanings, contextualizing is key. So in the following analysis of showcased objects in the German war exhibitions, we will look for that statement, that sometimes submerged message behind the first prominent meaning of the thing. And to finally come back to the already teased German war exhibitions. Here you can see one great overview of an exhibition in Karlsruhe. So these exhibitions were created and organized by the Prussian Ministry of War and the Red Cross, and had the proper name Deutsche Kriegsausstellung, which translates to German war exhibitions. In total, there were 5 sets or series of those exhibitions. The first set, for example, started in Berlin in January 1916, traveled to Dresden in June, to finally be showcased in Gdansk, back then Danzig, and end of September, beginning of October of the same year. The other 4 sets simultaneously covered cities all over the German Empire throughout the year, even including one exhibition in Constantinople, as Turkey was an ally of the German Empire since 1914. So they took the opportunity to exhibit there too. We know of 24 exhibitions in total, without counting the numerous special departments dedicated to the ongoing war, which were installed in already existing museums. The self-proclaimed aim of the wandering exhibitions was to literally bring the successes of the troops to the general public and to generate new funds for the exhibitions themselves. And especially with the Red Cross as promoter or presenter, the exhibitions appeared as mainly being charitable. And I will go back to the picture, sorry. If you have a close look, you can even see back here the ladies, which seem to be nurses, and you can even see a Red Cross in the back. So this charity feeling was really there. So it mainly appeared charitably. Postcards and shell fragments were sold, and in addition, so-called Nagelfiguren, nailmen, were set up. They either got incorporated into the exhibitions or as self-contained war monument in cities. So there were both possibilities. These statues came in different shapes and sizes. One of the most common design was the Iron Cross. And besides that, there were city arms, national or regional heroes, mythological characters, knights, or weaponry. I will explain how the propagandistic concept was supposed to work on this special nailman as an example. This one is the German Michel, or Deutscher Michel from Würzburg, and it was 3 meters tall, so it was over life size. So it worked like that. Depending on how much money the visitor paid, they could drive either a silver or a gold-colored nail into the wooden figure of the Michel. Each donation received a certificate as it says, permanent remembrance to the great time of the War of the Nations. This certificate underlined the charity character, as the donations should go to families of the fallen soldiers. But as always, with means of propaganda, there are more levels of meaning to it than may be recognized at first. So the first propagandistic message to those taking part in the nail figures was, show your patriotism and also simultaneously help those in need. So this was some sort of excitement provoked here. A second meaning or message, more subtle, connotation, but also transported, especially by choosing the Archangel Michael as a figure. This conveyed propagandistic messages. In Christianity, Michael, or the Saint Michael, is the conqueror of the devil and the leader of the army of God. I think this is also kind of self-explanatory. The figure of the saint reminded the visitors of God's support for the war, so to say. And of course, it was supposed to kind of soothe the anxious visitors who might have doubts, and to remind them that Saint Michael would overlook all the soldiers fighting this just war. This is only one part of, or one external part of, those war exhibitions. Just one little note to this picture. It is actually a scan of a book called Großer Bilderatlas, the big picture book for the Great War. And you see there are indeed pictures in there. And this is about the next mode of objects showed in these war exhibitions about prey and trophies. Right at the beginning of the war, so-called spoils of war officers were appointed. Their task was to make sure that looted munitions, which could not directly be reused for the own troops, got directed to special collecting points, which you can see in this picture or pictures. With introducing the concept of war exhibitions, those collection points became the pose for the exhibitions, as the moral strengthening of the home front became equally important as reusing all the munition. Yet the act of looting adverse munition and even showcasing it was not only about to feather one's own nest. It was also about degrading the foe and demonstrating his obvious powerlessness. Because if you think and have a look at these pictures, of course, the first thing comes to mind, okay, everything that is in those collection points can't be at the front. So this is already the first image, or the first message which gets transported by these pictures. But This concept of moving munition from the theater of war to showcasing it in the German Empire, these objects underwent some sort of transposition from the pragmatic, the militant, to a heroic, a representative context. And this ostentation of loot as military tradition was part of the public life already before the Great War. May it be during parades or as artistically created decoration of official buildings, such as, for example, on the facade of the Berlin Arsenal, the Zeughaus. The transposition from a practical to a heroic context can be traced back to the ancient meaning of trophies, which got symbolically placed where the foe left the battlefield. And these anthropomorphic trophies, the ones which appear human-like, you can see already here on the left and right-hand side of the hallway. So the armory of the fallen soldier was piled onto a stick in a way that it looked like some sort of puppet without arms, legs, and head. And this ancient tradition of arranging the loot to some sort of human-like trophy was, as you can see, also used in the war exhibitions. This one, again, is a picture of the war exhibition in Karlsruhe. So on the left and right-hand side of the hallway, you can see those arrangements reminding of the just explained anthropomorphic trophy. You see sabers and saddle pads hanging on the wooden boxes. So the sabers here and the saddle pads, those ones. On top of it, the cuirass is positioned and the arrangement is finalized by a helmet. And you see these armors were arranged as the soldiers would wear it. The saber is hanging where the hip kind of is supposed to be. The cuirass literally sitting on the saddle pad, aka the horse, and the helmet is where the head of the person is supposed to be. And this does not only mimic the ancient way of demonstrating the own power and the defeat of the enemy, but also evoking a connection to the knightly battle of former wars. Especially at the beginning of the war, knightly attributes were part of the language. As the Kaiser claimed shortly after the declaration of the war, he said, "Let the sword decide," and that the nation should and must defend itself until the last breath of man and horse, in order to win this battle against this world full of foes. So you see both the use of words and the arrangement of armor of the cavalry evoked a picture of the battle of past times, in which the cavalry would fight on their horses with previous weapons such as sabers and lances, and of course winning the battle. However, this was not true to the reality of the war in 1916 anymore. You can imagine, due to the static warfare, there was just no possible application of mounted soldiers anymore. And those mounted soldiers mostly got transferred to the infantry. Yet, the arrangement of armors of the cavalry sent misleading messages to the visitor. First of all, the message is the cavalry is still on duty. And because this branch of duty was always associated with heroic battles, the image got evoked that the ongoing war is of heroic and chivalric character. Another sign in the exhibition can be interpreted as conveying a propagandistic message, and it is a quite small one. If you have a look at the saddle pad on the left front, it is embroidered with the symbol of an exploding grenade. This symbol was used by French cavaliers with short rifles, of the 19th century, and is even nowadays used for a mounted regiment of French police guards. So this leads to the assumption that those saddle pads in the exhibition were looted from the French. And if you remember, the exhibition was shown in Karlsruhe, a city in the southwest of Germany with only about nowadays 20-kilometer distance to the French border. So by showcasing the presumably French saddle pad and taking into consideration that the visitors were able to recognize the symbol as coming from the French cavalry, two more messages were simultaneously transmitted. One, beware, the danger is real, and we need all your moral and monetary support. But on a second note, do not worry, the German troops predominate. The troops defeated the French enemy, otherwise we wouldn't be able to show you those trophies. And by the way, this was just one tiny symbol. The same messages can be read in the mode of showcasing the Voisin biplane in the back of the hall, which is quite prominent at the end of this hall. The plane can also be identified as a French one by the cockades, the distinctive colors you see on the end of its wings. And those distinctive colors were naturally colored. Of course, in a black and white picture, it is quite hard to recognize colors, and especially the similar colors used by the French and the British, it is quite difficult to really say, is it British or French? Yet, the official exhibition catalogue was great help because it highlights the plane as one of the French planes which flew an aggression on Karlsruhe in 1915. So you see the plane is kind of a sign over the victory of is a sign of the victory over the French, and simultaneously representing the danger of the foe, but yet also the strength of the German army. So the enemy is present, and speaking of the enemy, I will switch to the next picture. Sorry for the bad resolution of that one, but yes, as it is, if you work with historical objects, you rather have to go with what you can find and get. But this one is an interesting object too. So showing, or rather staging, the enemy in the exhibitions was another way of communicating this contorted image of the war as supposed to the reality. Especially the staging of the enemy is highly biased and based on the racist beliefs or so-called sciences of the 19th and 20th century. And on the one hand, there was this interpretation and connotation of the German soldiers fighting as an instrument of God's fierceness, following the ideology of a self-sacrificing patriot. On the other hand, resulted the characterization of the foreign soldiers from stereotypes and racist beliefs. And this concept of the enemy was evoked in order to generate cohesion of the own nation and the limitation towards the others. The stereotypical enemy was staged in an alleged real scene from the front. One example can be seen in the pictures of the war exhibition in Frankfurt, printed in a magazine. In this middle picture, we will have a look at that one and at that one down below, and I try to zoom kind of in so you know what I'm talking about when I describe it. So this middle picture, the one on the top right, is captioned as following: Gurkhas and Sikhs creeping through a wire entanglement. Both Gurkhas and Sikhs fought for the British Army, and the enemy was staged in a highly dangerous situation. Especially while slowly moving through the wire entanglements in an attempt of attack, soldiers usually got wounded or shot and got stuck in the wire. And you can see we have the wire entanglement here, and those puppets or figures kind of creeping or trying to creep through it. And the conveyed message is obvious, right? This enemy is rather a victim than to be feared, and even only from the poorly trained colonial auxiliary forces, presenting them as even less a threat. And the same belittlement can be seen in another picture of the Frankfurter War exhibition, the one down below, which is captioned as Russian group in camp singing and dancing. So besides the staging in an ethnological manner based on imagined stereotypes, yet again the enemy was depicted as harmless, because they are dancing and singing and not fighting. So by combining this belittlement and typification for the figurative display of the human as sort of prey, the victory over the enemy got symbolically transmitted. Also, in addition, by giving the enemy a face, sort of, the propagandistic aim was to strengthen the fragile national unity by distinguishing oneself from those others. And in contrast to degrading the others, the national propagandic policy created a cult around war heroes. And even though one could argue that the concept of being a hero is only a narrative, a social construction, an attribution by one or more observers, or rather because of their constructed characters, heroes became really a popular image of propaganda, or rather for propaganda. So what is a hero? Put it plainly, someone who is worshipped because of their ascribed efforts for the community. And those ascribed efforts for the community during the World War could not just be covered by soldierly achievements, but rather after the tragic death, a titulation as hero could be kind of earned. And the national propaganda policy concentrated on two types of heroes. The leader as a hero, the so-called Führerheld, and the sacrificial hero, the Opferheld in German. So the concept that sacrificing your life for the fatherland was the most honorable thing to do as a man was not a pattern of interpretation just established during the war, but already long before. The image of war hero or of a war hero was based on foregone wars. For example, the wars of unification during the 19th century were theaters of individual heroism. Now, the First World War, with its new weapon systems, which killed anonymously, they weren't fertile enough ground anymore for this sort of heroism. And even though there was next to no more lone fighters in this war of masses and machines, the public media successfully generated new heroes constantly, of course, always under the influence of the propaganda. So death in war was seen as kind of unavoidable, yet read as an extenuated heroic sacrifice which had to be made. Special convenient material for this idealized picture of heroes were the new branch of service, namely the combat pilots and the submarine commanders. So you see the romanticized representatives of the former warfare, such as the already mentioned cavalry, were exchanged by the new heroes fighting heroically in a duel, or at least that is how the propaganda suggested. And one special sort of devotion can be seen with Paul von Hindenburg, and now I can also click to the next picture so you can have a look at them already. So Paul von Hindenburg, together with Erich von Ludendorff, he held the 3rd Supreme Army Command, or Oberste Heeresleitung, since 1916. Together, they stood for military successes and therefore evoked new hope in the population. Especially Hindenburg proved as a successful object of devotion. Hindenburg was connected to the title Hero of Tannenberg and Savior of East Prussia. Because together with Ludendorff, he fought and won a battle against Russian troops in East Prussia in 1914. And this really great success, at least back then, great success for Germany or the German Empire in the early years of the war could now, in the later years of war, be used as some sort of myth opposing to the battles of material on the Western Front. And the personality cult of Hindenburg really evolved from this super elevation of this successful battle. And throughout several war exhibitions, one can spot really subtle cross-references to Hindenburg as hero of Tannenberg. And for the non-German speaking listeners, this name of that place, Tannenberg, can literally translated be to fir tree mountain. So you will get why I translated just in a few seconds. So if you have a close look at those 3 pictures of war exhibitions in Karlsruhe, you already know that one. We have here some greenery. This is a war exhibition in Würzburg in the Ludwigshalle. Also here, fir trees, and back here. And also not that quite to be recognized, but this one is a fir tree too, and this one here too, in the exhibition of Hanover. Just a side note, this exhibition in Hanover had a special dedicated department to Hindenburg. So this sort of part was dedicated to Hindenburg with those two fir trees inside. So what it is about these fir trees? Well, you know of the meaningful properties of flowers, besides them being beautiful, as for example, a red rose symbolizing romantic feelings, or laurel symbolizing special honor and success. And as already explained, in those exhibitions, you mostly spot fir trees, even though the plants were kind of only used as some sort of decoration, they carried signs and meanings nonetheless. A first reading of the fir tree as an evergreen can be based on its vernacular symbolization of eternity. Stylistically, the trees in the war exhibitions can be interpreted as a reminder of the eternal character of the war. Authorities kind of hoped and communicated it to be or to become. Because the ongoing war was not only to join in the victorious wars of the history, but simultaneously was supposed, or rather hoped, to be part of the future historiography as liberating and cleansing. The second reading, and you might have already guessed it with my introduction of Hindenburg and Tannenberg, is the reference of the fir trees to the victorious battle in Tannenberg in 1914. So evoking the connection to Hindenburg and the trust into his reoccurring achievements. That's about the plans in the exhibitions. Another type of heroes applied by the propaganda was the already mentioned sacrificial heroes. In this case, the combat pilots. And you can see already in the, this one was a plane by an enemy, but you see planes were big parts of the exhibitions. The most famous combat pilots of the German Empire were Oswald Boelcke, Max Immelmann, or Manfred Freiherr von Richthofen. And by having a look at their short lifespans of only 25, 26 years, even 100 years later, from our point of view, it's just tragic, to put it plainly. The ennoblement to being a hero, in contrast to all the other fallen soldiers, in the combination of the element of tragedy together with the combat achievements. So the combat pilots were already called heroes during their lifetimes, and the war exhibitions simultaneously used and fueled the hero cult. Here you can see a Fokker plane flown by Oskar Boelcke in the inner courtyard of the Berlin Armory, being exhibited in 1918. The Berlin Armory as arsenal since the end of the 17th century is an important building created by notable artists. And I think we could give a single lecture only about all the signs and symbols in this one building, but I will just let you know that this plane was exhibited in that building. Because after the German Union, the Armory building was used as museum and was being read as an allegory for militant victories. It was constructed already before the World War I, and therefore the overall architecture presentation is not product of the propaganda, of course, but nonetheless, it was just the perfect space for exhibiting the ongoing war in an already symbolically charged architecture. And inside this already charged space, Bölke's Fokker was exhibited, as you can see. You see, it is kind of a little bit ascending, and besides having the aura of being Bölke's Fokker, which was already charged on its own, the Fokker conveys even more messages. Of course, how else could it be? Of course, first of all, demonstrating the military technical advances and evoking trust into the German military. You recognize it is not a destroyed plane, and Bölke did indeed die after crashing into another plane while being in the air. So the visitors were already aware of the dangers the combat pilots put themselves into. Not wanting to increase the fear for the visitors, of course, an intact plane is showcased and basically saying, well, don't worry, we outclass the adverse pilots and planes. And of course, as already mentioned, the notion of the air battle being the new chivalric way of battle is being underlined, drawing again the line to the knightly ways of dueling, men against men in the air. And as a last tiny message, which is also being transported or can be transported by showcasing not just any Fokker, but the Fokker of one famous pilot everyone knew. This was a way of diverting from the literal anonymous mass dying in the war. And you see, the signs get smaller and smaller, and I could go on and on interpreting and contextualizing the German war exhibitions. And believe me, there is more to tell. But for those of you who now are hooked up on the topic, I can highly recommend the two works of Christine Beil, Der ausgestellte Krieg from 2004, and from Britta Lange, Einen Krieg ausstellen from 2003. Those are really important works on this topic, or basically the only two works really concentrating on this topic of war exhibitions. And just one last sentence for you to conclude everything I just talked about. In order to moralize the population, the propaganda created this complex interplay of messages in the exhibitions. And besides trying to strengthen the national community, the propaganda also aimed at soothing, distracting, and at controlled emotionalization. And all these propagandistic efforts accompanied and influenced the people during the war, of course. Yet, in the end, as you all know, these idolized messages were not strong enough to cover up the cruelty and reality of the war. And by the time of the truce in 1918, of course, this fragile constructed image of this idolized war was then completely destroyed. Yes, thank you for participating. And I guess we are open for questions if there are any.
We are indeed. Thank you very much. I have to apologize. I had some family matters to attend with two small children. This is a danger. And thanks again to Christoph that he started the the lecture for today. But yes, questions. Also interesting is that last week we heard a lot about the Allied side, Canada and Great Britain. And today we have the German side. So we've got the people in attendance today have some questions about that, the comparison of the two, or have some ideas to share. This is also obviously something you can do. I actually have a question. I obviously didn't hear the whole thing, but Hindenburg later then obviously was also someone who was pivotal to assure that Hitler got into power. And I presume that these exhibitions also really pushed his image and had, in the end, I guess, like an effect on his being appointed later in the political sphere. Is it so, or were there other aspects as well?
I would say it definitely can be said that those exhibitions really pushed his image, even though the exhibitions didn't go on after the war ended. So it was not that those exhibitions then just went on traveling through Germany. So they didn't go on, but yet I would say that they kind of pushed, but also rather more used the image of this hero cult of Hindenburg. Yes.
Thanks for that. So, do we have other questions? Let's have a look.
If not, it's either a good or a bad sign. Everything is clear or nothing is clear.
Well, gladly, people have the opportunity to revisit the lecture, me included. And then if there are more questions, obviously feel free to send an email to me and I can forward it to
yes.
Frau Berg. And then
yes, please do so. Open for discussion and questions and comments, even at a later stage.
I can also recommend your master thesis, but I'm not sure if it's publicly available in a repository.
No, sadly not. But whoever is interested, I can send it to you.
I'm not sure, maybe I'm doing a second question then. Did you do some research as well into the Second World War and some connections between those exhibitions, how that stuff was then later presented?
No, I didn't. I just really concentrated on all those aspects in the war exhibitions during the First World War, because what I did just in this 1 hour were just few of the examples being seen. But yet in Christine Ball's book, she is then concentrating on the exhibitions during the Second World War II and between the times between those wars. So if anyone is interested in this topic, Christine Ball's book is a good source for that one.
Last week, we also learned a lot about the fact that the Allies exhibited destroyed war machinery as a trophy to show, we destroyed these tanks, so we also suffered, but we were heroic about it. Was it also the case that they exhibited in Germany destroyed or wounded artifacts, or not so much?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, this is one point I left out for today's lecture. Definitely. They showed even some sort of just piles of entangled pieces, which you just can't really recognize anymore. And they definitely did so. Also, the Voisin double-decker plane in the Karlsruhe war exhibition is supposed to have holes in its wings, yet I sadly couldn't really recognize it on the pictures, so that's why I didn't say it, because if you don't see it, then it might be not real, but it is said so in the official catalog for this exhibition. So yes, this was definitely also a great sort of message conveyed through the destroyed machinery, saying, okay, look what we destroyed, look how great we are, this is everything we could destroy, and everything which is destroyed and on display, of course, cannot be at the front.
The Richthofen plane, was it exhibited before his demise or after?
You mean Bölke? Because
sorry.
No worries. No.
I was wrong. I had this feeling you talked about the Richthofen plane as well, but I just imagined that.
I just shortly mentioned him, yes, but I don't think that they showcased. When was it? Well, he died in 19. I have it on my. He died in 1916, and the plane was exhibited in 1918. So yes, this was already after his death. His death, yeah.
And so again, I guess used for making him a hero and not really focusing on any of the stuff we would focus on today, you know, like, I guess, trauma and...
No. No critical looking at that. It was also not only this showing him as a hero, but also using him as a hero. So both fueling and kind of using this hero cult, yes.
And I'm not sure if you already mentioned it in your presentation, but did visitors to these exhibitions, is there any records what they said, what they felt? Did they say, yay, awesome, or were there critical voices as well?
Actually, I have to say that I didn't check on those, but during my research on this topic, I didn't really stumble across any feedback from those voices. Of course, there are newspaper articles, but as it is during these times, what you read in the newspaper is not always true. Also, kind of propagandistic. So what you can read in the newspaper is most likely positive. Hey, go there, have a look. It's great. But there are no visitors' responses that I know of.
Okay, might actually be interesting to see if anything is left over in the archives, or if it all like burned down during the Second World War. It's the next research project, maybe. Well, if there are no questions from the audience, then I don't see any raised hands or something. And let's say we call it for today. Again, many thanks to you. And as I said, I fortunately couldn't listen to the whole thing, but I will listen to the recording. And but I'm very pleased that you were able to make it and that you contributed to the lecture series with your presentation.
Thank you for the invitation.
And next week we will look at the Hürtgenwald forest, so again a German topic, with Christoph Raas and Frau Miriam Adams. And this will be quite interesting too, because we have here like a landscape that has been up to today well, misused in a way. It's Second World War battle, and even today we have right-wing groups who try to use it for their purposes, but also obviously the people around Christoph Raas and their research project that try to counteract these narratives. So we move basically from the past and past exhibitions into the present and look at some contemporary ways of dealing with the legacy of the Second World War. And as we learned today, First World War and Second World War are obviously connected, and it seems that propaganda had played a big role in exactly this, to enable people to forge these narratives that later led into some very very sad and tragic events. Yes, in any case, you guys have a good afternoon, evening, and we see each other next week. Yes. Any last words?
Not from my side, except thank you.
Excellent. Good. And see you around, and all the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.